Folks, thank you everyone for coming. This forum is hosted by the League of Women Voters of the Red River Valley. My name is Bailey Stickney. I'll be the moderator this evening. The forum is being recorded for playback. Thanks to our MCAM folks back there. Really appreciate you. And this recording will also be available on our website and Facebook page. They've just got to do a little bit of editing, and when they get it to us, it goes on the website. We are live, that's right, on YouTube. Thank you so much. The League of Women Voters, we are a nonpartisan political organization, and we encourage informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy through things like this forum. If you would like to learn about us as an organization, you can find out about us on our website and our Facebook page. Again, Moorhead Library, thank you. We've been here so often the last couple weeks, and I just really appreciate this space to hold these forums. And of course, the technical assistance from MCAM again. And of course, our volunteers. We have a whole bunch of volunteers over here that are super helpful. Before we launch into the questions, I want to talk about the voter guide, vote411.org. This voter guide is pretty neat because it does have information about the big races, but it also has information about local races, which are often really tough to find any sort of information on. So, vote411.org, you can also check to see if you're registered. You can get registered if you need to get registered. And my favorite part about Vote 411 is as you go through and look at the candidates, if you select, oh, I like this person, I want to say yes or no on this measure. If you select those as you go through, at the end you can actually print that off and bring it with you to the polls so that you don't forget which way you wanted to vote, because I forget names as soon as I leave the computer. All right, I've got to go over the rules and procedures real quick here. Questions have been submitted in advance by the public online, and then if you are here and you think of a question, you can grab a note card over there and a pen, write it down, and Tiffany or Deb will come and grab your note card from you. Just hold it up and someone will come grab it from you. And they will run it up to me. So, questions, we do screen them, so they may rewrite them so that I can read it, or it may be similar to another question that we have, but we try to get to every question that we can. And every candidate will be given an opportunity to address each question. Each candidate will have 1 minute for their opening statements, and then each will be allowed 1 minute to respond to each question. And when we finish the Q&A period, each candidate will be given another 1 minute for their closing remarks. A timer, Lynn in the beautiful purple hair over here, will keep track of your time. And at 30 seconds, she'll hold up a 30-second card, and then you'll hear the alarm when a minute has gone by. You can keep talking, so you can finish your thought or your sentence, but please do wrap up when you hear that alarm. All right. And we would appreciate quiet in the audience so that we can all hear the answers from our candidates. And now we're going to move into opening statements. Joshua Zink, start with you.
Hello, my name is Joshua Zink, and I'm running to be the House Representative for District 4A, or Moorhead. So I'm kind of young, I'm new to this. This is my first time running for any sort of public office, but my background and experience is pretty diverse. I've had very good political education since I was homeschooled by a social science major with a teaching license. And then after that, I went and got an Associates of Applied Science degree from M-State in mechanical drafting and design. And I have worked in retail, I have been working in manufacturing, and then most recently, I've been outdoor knocking. A lot of you might have encountered me at your front door or encountered my flyers at your front door, which would have been left either by me personally or a campaign staff of mine.
Thank you. Heather Keeler.
Thank you. I'm going to start by saying thank you to the League of Women Voters. I love that you do this because being informed in your voting decisions is really important, so thank you. And the fact that it's so volunteer-led is also really wonderful, so thank you for that. My name is Heather Keeler. I am your district state representative for District 4A, serving in Moorhead. I was elected in 2020, which is crazy because it was a pandemic, so many things were behind screens, and so we've really grown in different ways in the community from there. I'm a mom of two young, beautiful boys. One actually graduated as a spud last year, and then I have a third grader, so I am a mom. In this community, I served as an Indian education liaison prior to being elected. One of the things I did while I was going to school to earn my bachelor's and master's at MSUM, I like to call myself a double dragon, making sure I did that. I actually moved to this community because of higher education. It seems to be a story that's common to a lot of people here. We came here for school and we fell in love with the community and stayed, and so that's what happened with me and my family. But while I was asking my community what were academic barriers to academic success, the community told us that lack of representation, homelessness, and food insecurities were the reason why people weren't being successful in school and becoming professionals in our community. And so I just decided to be a voice for that. I've really stayed in those lanes, increasing that to extensive access to mental health. And so I really do a lot of work in those areas, making sure that we're a voice and actually bringing people together. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Thaddeus Laugish.
Hello, and thank you for having me. Is this on? Hello, check. Okay, thank you. Hello, and thank you for having me today. And also thank you to the LWV for putting this on. This is important for our community to really hear what us candidates have to say in regards to how we live our lives today. I am a father of two daughters, also a graduate of Moorhead High School is my oldest daughter, as well as a fifth grader. I am also a designer as well as a safety director for 16 years for a commercial ag general contractor, where I've designed some of the facilities that we have in our area here today. With that experience, I have designed a lot of our projects here, and that includes basically fitting 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag at the cost of 2, because we always have to work around budgets and be constrained around the availability that we have for funds. So I want to do that for us here in 4B as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Since you mentioned budgets, we're going to start with a budget question. Heather, we'll start with you. What is your approach to balancing the state budget while maintaining essential services for Minnesotans? Do you support any changes to the current tax system? And how do you plan to ensure fair taxation for residents and businesses?
I think taxes is an interesting conversation because there's a lot of needs that we have in our community. I hear that when I go door to door. I hear that when I've had conversations like roads, like our school district, like different things like that. And so for me, one of the things we've talked a lot about when it comes to our tax structure is Minnesota has a robust, high business structure, and making sure that we potentially add a 5th tier to taxes. I think taxing the highest, wealthiest people in the communities to give back to the individuals who are underserved. Like I said, I sit in a space that I really support ending homelessness because we all deserve to have a home. And so I think balancing the budget means that we utilize incomes from people to actually support neighbors. A lot of us grew up understanding systems that when we take care of each other, we're at our best selves in community. And so I look at taxes as not something that's scary or something that we should get away from, but I think that the most wealthiest should have to pay their tax, and then the individuals who need it the most and our neighbors in our community should be able to access that.
Thank you. Thaddeus.
Yes, thank you. I feel personally that going to the communities and speaking with the individuals of 4B on both Clay County and Becker County, our taxation is a little too high. Our property tax primarily was the main focus of what individuals in the community have said to me. I personally feel that we should look at restructuring our property tax to where we can see a decline each year instead of an increase via the cost of the houses around us. I feel that if we rework and reallocate some of our existing policies, we can find a way to reduce our tax structure while still providing the services that our communities do need and we do deserve. That includes our EMS services as well as fire services as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Joshua.
So, as Heather said, funding is a very interesting topic, as are taxes. The strategy, I think, should be variable depending on what it is. Like, for example, our law enforcement has been getting increasing budgets recently because retention and hiring of officers has been harder recently. Whereas, for example, I talked with school officials a while ago, and they said the primary thing that would help them in their funding problems the most would be the removal of a lot of the mandates they've gotten recently from the Minnesota Education Board. So it depends on what the problem is, whether taxes should be increased, decreased, budgets changed, or simply looking at ways to make things more efficient.
Thank you. On the topic of funding, there is a school levy on the ballot in Moorhead here, and it's been said that we need more state money in order to fund our school appropriately and get this to pass. What do you see the state doing to help schools out? Oh, sorry, and that would be Thaddeus.
I feel a good benefit that we have somewhat been lacking is to cooperate with our successful businesses in town. One field that our education tends to lack on would be our trades. Our trades are a very robust industry that is desperately needed of additional workers to meet the projects and the demands that we have in our communities. And I feel that if we work with our existing and our successful community leaders, which is our businesses, to work with our schools, we can help benefit our children's education, because our children's education is our most important investment that we have to make as a community, because our children will make up our decisions for us inevitably when we get older. And if we do not make sure that their funding is adequate to ensure that education, then I am personally concerned about how our communities can end up in the future.
Thank you. Joshua.
Interestingly enough, for education funding, that was something else that was brought up when I talked with school leadership, was the amount of funds that they get to use per student coming from the state has not actually changed in 10 years. So that's with all the inflation, all of everything that has happened in the last 10 years, the dollar amount they get per student has not changed. So I think if we were to look at that and change that and start increasing that to follow inflation, we'd probably see some of that funding problem go away. As well as I said before, if we removed some of the mandates that have been put on our education system, that would also solve a lot of the funding problems that we have.
Heather.
I think it's important that we speak about the truth here. We actually have made massive changes to the education system. To be very clear, we put an increase in the budget, and we put it into the tails as well. So just for an education combo here, one-time money means you put one thing into it. We actually increased the tails to this massively. When you look at what the school districts are getting right now, what we did was increased the ongoing per pupil rate that you get per student. And so average in 2024, school districts are getting an increase of a little over 6%. And in the tails, moving forward after 25, that goes up to 7%. We also included inflation in that. So as we grow with your state funding, because we did put money into the education system, robustly amount of money, it's growing to follow inflation too by 2%. So not only did we add 7% in the tails, which is a mass increase, which for Moorhead, that's massive, we also included inflation, because we talk a lot about inflation. We've heard how inflation impacts us, particularly in our building materials. And so we want to make sure, as our schools are growing and making that opportunity, that we actually pushed on the House side against our own Senate to make sure that inflation was a part of that. And so I think it's important that we talk about the truth. Also, when we talk about the levy in general, adding that to our community, let's keep in mind there's other communities in the nation. Am I done? Are you going to ask me another question? Can I talk about it another time? Thank you. Yeah, turn the buzzer up, Lynn. Yeah, ding, ding, ding. My bad. Sorry.
Thanks for keeping track. More funding. Who did I start with last? Thaddeus? Okay, so Joshua, this will be for you. Churches United is in crisis, and we have some folks wondering if the state can do anything to help.
That is a good question. I suppose there might be, but I'd have to look into that specific topic more, to be perfectly honest. My research on this is still ongoing, still very much incomplete, obviously. You know, I only started working on my running a few months ago, but I've been reading copious amounts of material, but I haven't necessarily seen anything on Churches United specifically, so I will have to push that to the top of my reading list.
Thank you. Heather?
Good news is they're at the top of my list. And actually, ending homelessness is a priority for me. In the last biennium, we passed what was called the Pathway Home Act, which was a historic amount of money to invest in homelessness. We did it in a braided approach. We actually gave money to the counties in homeless aid that's actually funneling down. And in Churches United directly, I've had a lifelong experience with them. Long before ever being elected, I served actually in the emergency food shelves with my youngest sons, because giving back into this community is really important. But we actually we gave Churches United $50,000 in our budget last year so that they could work on partnering with individuals like Propel to help them realign their board. They are a board structure, understanding that when we have nonprofits, it's important that our boards are aligned. And so we've also been working directly with the county and other agencies and entities in the community on how we can build them back better than what they were. There's a lot of internal structures that we have to do, but have had robust conversations, because as I've said, ending homelessness is a priority, not just a conversation for me. Thank you. Nailed it.
Thaddeus?
Churches United recently did have a scare in funding, and I do have to commend my neighbor here to the right of me for actively doing work during even campaign in order to make sure that they did get some secure funding in order to make and continue the work that they do provide. It's important. Like Paul Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better, and that starts with our homeless situation. We need to make sure that we provide the proper funding in order to make sure that they can actually have a foundation to step up and become a good person with our society once again. And we do, as a state, need to find a way to where we can provide funding for not only Churches United, but other homeless shelters that are in our area that do provide the same kind of assistance for people in need.
Thank you. Heather, we'll start with you. How is the possibility of a psychiatric facility for youth coming along?
Oh, I love this question. A psychiatric residential treatment facility is something that we've been talking about. When we talk about access to mental health and you look at the statewide approach, we just don't have these services at all. So what this is our high-level mental health students who are kids in our community. What's happening to them now is they're ending up in three spaces that are not actually helpful for them long term. They're either going across the bridge and ending up in our healthcare facilities like Sanford and Essentia, which is not where they need to be. They're being housed in our juvenile detention center, which Josh will tell you that's not a funding source or support for them, or they're being sent out of state to services and organizations that don't allow us to do the help that we need to do. And so we've worked diligently, and I want to give the county commissioners that are here an absolute shout out for the work that you've continued to do to have robust conversations, not only amongst ourselves, but with 23 other counties and 5 tribal nations, saying that this is a requirement that we really need to have in the state. And the best part about it is we have such an amazing community with higher education institutions and healthcare systems, and Solutions has partnered with us to make sure that we get this done. And so I think the approach that we have is absolutely something that we can get across the finish line, because we have so much community support around it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thaddeus?
I too want to thank the county commissioners that are here too for the work they have done in order to try to make this happen, even though the funding did not go through at last session. We do need the funding, we do need the work, we do need to make sure that our families, our parents can be along and with their kids when they're in their most crisis time of need. If we have our kids going 3 hours, 4 hours away, that is a long financial strain on both the parents as well as the relationship between the child that is in need as well as the parents. We need to make sure that we do have that kind of assistance provided for our local areas so that we can make sure that our kids can succeed better in life.
Thank you. Joshua?
I also think we do need to fund something like that, not just for our students, but also for adults. Because when I talked with Clay County Sheriff's Department a while ago, they actually mentioned how in multiple cases they have people who have been committed and should be getting mental health treatment, either from psychologists or psychiatrists, but they can't get it simply because there aren't beds available in Minnesota. So it's not just our youth that need this help, But it's also law enforcement that needs this help, as well as adults that are just living their lives in society, where they might just need that little extra bit of help to keep things going well. So that is definitely something that we need to work on.
Thank you. We're getting some great questions from the audience. Thank you, folks. Let's continue. I got another couple of questions on this topic. I think it's important. I personally don't know a lot about this. We have someone wondering how or if you might address 24-hour hold statewide problems. And that might be referring to crisis beds for folks that are in immediate need. Sorry, yeah.
Or is it Joshua?
You did, so Thaddeus.
Oh, it is me.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Not doing my job.
When it comes to a 24-hour hold, it is unfortunate that we do have a strain when it comes to volunteers, as well as social workers, as well as our nurses and our doctors. And sometimes those holds seem impossible, especially with the resources that are currently available and just, unfortunately, our current situation. I feel that in this moment, we probably should be able to allocate some existing structures as well as some rooms that can be accommodated to help house in a 24-hour crisis, as well as look for ways to realize that when a person is in a moment where they do need 24-hour crisis, they shouldn't be labeled that for the rest of their lives. So we need to have a way to find out or figure out that society can accept them once again as a whole person back into our society, to where we shouldn't have to necessarily shame them with a required 24-hour hold if it's something that is not necessarily a 24-hour hold as well. So,
Thanks. Josh?
That is actually a very interesting question and very interesting problem, because that is extremely complex, and like you, I will have to do more research on that myself. So that, yeah, unfortunately, I don't know enough to be able to answer that question for sure right now, but I will definitely read up on that as well.
Thank you. Heather?
Can you ask the question one more time, please?
So how will you address the... Okay. How will you address the 72-hour hold statewide problems?
Well, we would have community conversations to learn more about what the problem is first. But I think, so one of the things that we have is we're a border city. And sometimes there's things on the other side of the state that impact what we can do on our side of the state. But one of the things I was able to do in my role is that the one thing I've learned as a politician is I do not know everything. But the one thing that I do know is relationships matter. And we have chairs that make these decisions that need to know our community voices. And so what we've been able to do and what I've been able to do is we've brought 9 chairs out to this community to build relationships with people. That's including our tax chairs, our human services, our healthcare, our education, different chairs to build these relationships with us so that when we have concerns and conversations, particularly if it's a border city issue or a greater Minnesota issue or a West Side issue, we don't always have all the solutions at the point, but when we have the relationships and the deeply rooted relationships in the community, we can get to those solutions sooner. So I would say whoever actually asked that question would love to have a more robust conversation about it in the future. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with, I'm losing track, Joshua this time. So, are you willing to introduce legislation that would reinstate protections for women seeking abortions to reverse some of the extreme portions of the abortion legislation passed last session?
I would actually. And I'll mention some of the ones specifically, because right now there is actually no requirement for licensing for abortion clinics. I feel like we should be having those things licensed, because we got to make sure that if they are doing what they're going to be doing, that they're going to be doing it correctly, making sure that they protect people. We also have nothing in place where if there is an abortion and the victim is alive on the table, essentially it has become a birth now where the aborted baby is now alive on the table, they don't have to give any medical intervention to help that person survive.
Heather?
We're not changing anything. I'm not going to go back to change anything. I believe truly that medical decisions should be made between an individual and their medical professional, period. Thank you.
Thaddeus?
I feel as a job of a representative is to ensure that all access is available to individuals that may seek whatever they need between them and their doctor. It is not my place to control or determine what a person does with themselves or in whatever situation that they may face themselves with. It is my job to make sure that they do have the access that they have, and that's why I'm proud to be endorsed by Planned Parenthood. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll start with Heather. It's tough, I assume, to live here and work in St. Paul. How can each of you commit to attending critical sessions, and how do you make sure that votes are getting cast when they need to be cast?
Is that me first?
Yeah.
So I think the first thing we need to talk about is educating the difference between a yes vote, a no vote, and an abstain vote. So if you look at our voting record, often sometimes it will say we abstain. That doesn't mean that we were not there, and that does not mean we were not casting the vote. In my mind, ethically to the core, I do not vote yes or no if I don't have enough information to make that decision, or if it's ethically unsound either way. And so I have abstained from votes. That's not something typical that my party likes, because we like to align. I know that I serve a community that maybe doesn't align with the rest of the Democratic Party at times, and so I have taken some abstain votes. As far as my attendance record, I'm 98% attendance, and one of the things I've been able to do is create a remote option. One of the things I learned, as I mentioned, I was elected in the pandemic, is we had a lot of remote options. Being 3.5 hours away and going to session from January to May, that's really awful weather, as you all know. And so not only for ourselves, but for our community, we've increased the opportunity for remote access as well. And so due to some medical appointments that I've had back here, I've had to utilize the opportunity to remote vote, but I'm really proud of the work that we've done. It's a huge sacrifice to be able to go because you have to be there and you have to attend every day. Thanks.
Thank you. Thaddeus?
As a representative, I feel it's the responsibility of that representative to be there at session at all times, and as well as in the conversations outside of session, because that's where a lot of the voice is heard from the people of your community. And that's where a lot of the funding happens, and that's where a lot of the infrastructure projects gets allocated. And I want to make sure that I will be there present 98 or if not 99% of the time to ensure that those votes are made, because we do need to make sure that we have a yes vote when it comes to EMS services, as well as a yes vote for our fire halls, as well as our funding like an HF 1938. Thank you.
Joshua?
So I actually don't think attending the sessions would be too much of a problem, because for me, I don't necessarily have any particular obligations here that I would have to come back on a regular basis during the sessions, and the state of Minnesota is actually very helpful in making sure that we have accommodations when we need to be in the Capitol for sessions. So if I was elected, whether or not my job would let me do that, I'd be, if I had to, I'd be quitting my job and going to do that full time, and I'd be staying down there during the sessions to make sure I'm there every day.
Thank you. All right, Thaddeus, we will start with you. The cost of housing, I know this is a nationwide problem, but what do you feel you could do as a state representative to change housing situations for those of us here?
Yes, I would support current legislation that has been passed to make sure that there's a limit on corporate buyouts of homes, as well as I'd like to also work to ensure that we do have homes that are more affordable for your first-time home buyer. That means we have to look at how many times or how many homes are currently being flipped and increased at $100,000 to $150,000 per home in order to get a higher profit out of the home, when that removes a home or availability for a new family to try to develop some equity on themselves. I feel that we need to look at the legislation that's also passed to prevent any kind of streamlining of projects, because it's important to ensure that our infrastructure as well as our zoning can meet the demands of new homes as well as our existing homes, so that we do not create an overburden on existing homes as well.
Thank you. Joshua?
Interestingly enough, I actually went and had a meeting with the Fargo-Moorhead Builders Association to ask specifically that question. And I was told that one of the things, because actually I have experienced that housing is kind of crazy, because, you know, it was a little over a year ago now when I was house hunting myself, and it can be a bit of a challenge. But I was told one of the things that could help is, not universally, obviously, but in a few different spots, building codes are actually a little bit over-restrictive, and in some ways end up driving up the cost of building a home more than is actually worth it for the result of the difference that the code causes. So that would be something, but I think the main thing would really just be improvements in the economy, which that's more of a federal level issue.
Thank you. Heather?
You're not wrong. One of the things I was able to do was work with the Building Association a while ago on frost footing. I know that it's like one of the things that a lot of people don't know a lot about, but we learned that North Dakota had a smaller depth than us, and so we worked on understanding the northern weather patterns on frost depth, and we actually ended up eliminating the depth, and which ended up saving homes close to $2,000 to $3,000 in their build structure. But what it allowed me to do was to dig into thinking bigger on things that the state to do, not just the federal options. And I think that with the robust farming industry that we have, we should really look at hemp. You know, one thing that we do is we're stuck on the building materials that we use right now with the Department of Labor. And when you have such a small market of materials, that's how you can increase the rate. And so I think we need to add new materials into it. Hemp is outstanding. It's good for Mother Earth. It increases the nitrogen for greater yields for our farmers, but also can be used for hempcrete, hemp mortar, hemp insulation, hemp rebar. It's fireproof practically, and it's just much more efficient in our utilities as well. So we have to think outside of the box in the materials, and that would be something that would be a massive investment here for Minnesota because of our agriculture. So we've thought through it and really getting robust out of the box ideas.
Thank you. Joshua, we'll start with you. Agriculture is a vital part of Minnesota's economy. How do you plan to support farmers and agricultural communities, particularly in the face of climate change and market challenges?
I would say mostly just get out of their way and let them do their job. You know, we don't need to put extra restrictions on them and how to do things. For the most part, they know what it is that they need to do. My grandfather farmed for a long time, and my grandmother still rents out the farmland that they own to a farmer in that area. So, and he was a part of the soil, water, and wildlife conservation effort in that area. In fact, if I remember correctly, I believe he helped start it. So I think farmers generally know what they need. I think we just need to ask them and then help them get it.
Thank you. Heather?
Can you ask the question again?
Agriculture is a vital part of Minnesota's economy. How do you plan to support farmers and agricultural communities, particularly in the face of climate change and market challenges?
So the thing I like the most about our senator is he deeply understands weather, he understands climate, and he sits on the Ag Committee in the Senate. And so one of the things we've done is we've built this robust net that we utilize to sit at spaces. And so when it comes to ag stuff, I really deeply lean into Senator Kupek to teach us. Also, I've learned how to drive a tractor because it's one of the areas that I know is a blind spot for me, but also building those relationships and going out. The one thing that I really fight to defend is our water and protecting our water, because at the end of the day, farmers will tell you they have to have clean water to grow good crops. And so I think that's one area that we actually need to be more mindful of. Things are getting hotter. Water is rising. We see that in a lot of spaces. And so I think we just need to make sure that we keep people in spaces that believe that these things are happening because of us, not just because of random things in the world.
Thanks. Thaddeus?
As a designer of commercial ag facilities and processing systems, I understand, and I'm also part of that same industry, and it is absolutely vital for especially the western part of Minnesota that we do focus on our ag. That includes doing the support in order to maintain that we do have vital soil on our fields. as well as making sure that we do have our rural communities able to provide the services that our farmers do need, and that includes access to health care, emergency services, as well as food and affordable child care, as well as senior services in their communities that still live in those homes in those rural communities as well. Those are a lot of the common topics that we have had in Rostad, Holly, Hitterdal as well, that when I went around and talking and door knocking with them, and I look to provide those services for those communities as well.
Thank you. Heather, we'll start with you. Access to healthcare is a critical issue for many Minnesotans. What specific actions will you take to improve healthcare access and affordability for residents of our district?
So one of the things that we dive into is billable services when it comes to access to healthcare. We also are a border city community, so a lot of our community goes across to another state to receive access to healthcare. And so it's figuring out how we get people to those access points. And so some of the things we've really been talking about when it comes to access to healthcare is not necessarily the cost, but actually the physical ability to get to the things that you need to do. Non-emergency medical transportation is a thing that we really, really need to address and look at, because you can have the best coverage as you want, but if you can't actually get to the doctor or get to the location that you need for maybe chronic pain management, we have to have robust systems to do that. But the other thing is that we sit at tables and we're talking about Medicaid waivers and how we can open up opportunities to provide unique services for our communities across the way, because at the end of the day, we cannot have these rigid borders that say you cannot provide services. And again, as a border city, it's something that we have to look deeply into and look at the possibility of being a pilot site for the state of Minnesota, because we do have to work across the bridge in a high medical facility area.
Thank you. Thaddeus?
For part of the 4B communities, it's often to have a 30 to 40-minute response time in the case of emergency, and unfortunately that is not good enough. We currently have some volunteers that are willing to provide EMS services. Barnesville, I like to shout out because they do have a good staff of volunteers. However, they do need funding, and funding is required in order to make sure that our EMS services can be provided for our communities, and that includes voting yes for EMS funding when it is on the bill, unlike the 11 that did not vote for that last session.
Thank you. Joshua?
I would say one of the easiest ways to make healthcare more affordable and accessible to people is to make it a legal requirement that hospitals post their prices at the door. I'm sure a lot of people have heard many stories or have experienced a story themselves where they're going in for something that they anticipate that they're going to need, and they're trying to find out what the pricing is, and they make it very hard to find that out. Two other things that I would say we should probably do is make sure that the insurance companies that you might have aren't necessarily making medical decisions for you, because the medical decisions should be made by your doctor, not by your insurance company, who is not a medical practitioner. And then I would say that the last thing I would like to see would be an increase in emphasis of preventative care by our medical industries. So often at this point we end up coming in too late and then have to look at cures instead of solving it ahead of time.
Thank you. Minnesota has a diverse population, yet equity and inclusion remains a key issue. For example, outcomes for children of color are much worse than their white counterparts across the board. How will you work to promote racial, economic, and gender equity? Oh, that will be Thaddeus.
I feel we first need to address that racism does exist on a systematic level, and it's not necessarily intentional, but it does exist, and we need to admit that before we can actually address the discrepancies that we have between race and the equality between those races. Equity is definitely a priority when it comes to me, myself, as we all are human beings. There's nothing different between us, and we need to realize that and focus on that so we can actually move forward and finally put an end to this hate and create a more civil environment like we should have already had decades ago.
Thank you. Joshua?
So, unfortunately, Thaddeus, I am going to have to disagree with you. I don't think we have a problem of systemic racism. I won't disagree that there are racists in this country, but I don't think that this country is racist. Because when you want something and you want a result and you work for it, you can achieve it. For me, I went to college, but it might surprise some of you to find out I did not take out a single loan to go to college. So I worked through high school. I worked very hard at multiple different jobs and actually saved up all the money in cash to be able to put myself through school. And then after that, I went and got a good job out of college, and I saved up again, and I'm now the owner of a mortgage for a house, which in probably another 27 years I will be the proud owner of. So I don't think it necessarily matters who you are. I think the outcome is dependent on the opportunities that you choose to seize and the effort that you put in.
Heather?
As an Indigenous queer woman, I would disagree with that. Deeply, I've lived in a world that I know that we get treated different. I think that there are privileged mind frames in this world that really like to assume that some of us just need to go out, like, they always use this statement, like, just go to the boot store, and I say often, like, I don't need a boot store. I grew up wearing moccasins, and that's definitely okay. And so I think the way that I address inequities in housing is I show up at the table. Representation matters, and making sure that as an Indigenous person serving a community that, one, is 7% Indigenous, we are on Indigenous land, 100% of Minnesota is ceded treaty territory, and so it is important that we have those conversations and we show up. And we do, I agree with Thaddeus. We have to call it out, and we have to say that it's there. The data points will show you, if looked at any data record, our homeless, our incarceration, our lack of graduation rates, you can see that there's something happening in the world systemically that's holding different groups of people back, and us continuing to show up to acknowledge that and create systems that, we talk a lot about local control and community engagement, and understanding that every community has its own unique needs, and addressing that is critically important.
Thank you. Joshua, we'll start with you. Many rural communities face challenges with infrastructure, including roads, public transportation, even internet access. What initiatives would you support to improve these things?
That is a very good question indeed. And I actually do know exactly what you're talking about, as during my high school years, we lived out in Ulen, Minnesota. And I can tell you one thing, the internet was definitely very bad. So I actually do not know exactly what should be done about that, because a lot of those sorts of things are done with tax money that is obtained locally, either by the townships or the cities or whatever. So that would be something where the representatives for those areas would have to go to their constituents, to their city leaders, to their local area leaders, and figure out a plan for how to go about solving that.
Thank you. Heather?
I think the infrastructure piece is a thing that I'll address. A lot of our infrastructure comes from our bonding, and the one thing that we've done in Minnesota is we've been able to obtain a AAA bonding accreditation, which actually means we have the best bonding opportunities in the state, or in the nation, and so that's good for us. That's a good financial move for us as a state. So I think if we're going to move into any infrastructure, we have to get back on our bonding routine, because that's how we keep that high level of accreditation. And that means that it's difficult when we go into session in Minnesota. Our first year is a budget year, our second year is a policy bonding year, and with the pandemic, we really got out of sync with that, and we got out of line with that, and we know that it is critical to get back to infrastructure. And so I really hope that we, one, keep in mind that we need to get back on track, but then potentially go back in this year in our budget year and do a small infrastructure bonding package, because I think that we have the bipartisan support to do that. And waiting another 2 years could really be critical in some of that infrastructure. But I think the thing that we have to do is get back on track to keep that AAA bonding status.
Thank you. Thaddeus.
Like Heather mentioned, a lot of our infrastructure is reliant on bonding, and that requires a vote yes for our bonding instead of a vote no in both sessions that we had in the last 2 years. We had some road projects that were delayed that were vital infrastructure bonding projects for our area that I would vote to ensure of. We also have some wants in our communities. For instance, Becker County, the Washington Ballpark, it could really use a good facelift. Every individual in that community that I spoke to agrees with me 100% on that, and that is reliant on bonding. And we need to ensure that our AAA status is used to our benefit and get the projects funded that we need.
Thank you. For Heather, in today's political climate, partisanship can be tough. How do you plan to work across party lines to effectively represent us?
I've been doing that. My record will show that I'm the most actually bipartisan member in the House, which is really goes back to my community. I know and deeply understand that it's my job to go and do the work of this community, and that means that we have to be bipartisan. If you've looked at a map, it's no surprise that I'm the Democratic dot in a very Republican sea, and I know that working across the aisle is critical. I've done that in both working with our Senate partners, bringing support to CDL licensing with M-State. We've done that right now. I'm actually chairing the legislative attendance study group with Representative Bakeberg across the aisle because we believe that addressing attendance is a bipartisan issue. The work that we're doing with the psychiatric residential treatment facility, Representative Joy has signed on and has done diligent work with us there. Passed $5 million in the middle of a session to be able to get food shelf infrastructure out because food shelves were going to close, and that was absolutely bipartisan. And then lastly, the thing I'm most proud about is in the middle of session last year, we did what was called the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act. That was an entirely green board that was 100% bipartisan to support Native American children. And so I absolutely, my record will show you that I believe in bipartisanship as well, even when it's uncomfortable.
Thank you. Thaddeus.
Yeah, with my career, I'm a problem solver. I like to figure out problems and make solutions for them. Our political climate it's distasteful. It's name calling, it's stereotypes, and it's just political banter where I feel that we are both opposing parties that are on cliff sides yelling at each other and only half of what we say is heard. I'm personally one that's willing to cast away those insults as well as name calling or stereotyping to actually create the conversations that we need in order to come up with some sound solutions to our decades-long issues that I'm personally kind of tired of hearing about. I'd like to actually find some solutions to counter those issues so we can actually talk about things and make politics boring again. Thank you.
Joshua.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to see politics get boring again too, because frankly, a lot of, like you said, problem solving. That is essentially what we're supposed to be doing. We shouldn't be yelling. We shouldn't be bickering. We shouldn't be throwing insults at each other. And towards that effort, when I was out door knocking, one of the things I did is I actually went ahead and knocked on doors that had signs supporting the Democrat Party, because not necessarily I wanted to convince them to change, but I wanted to find out why they supported you or what their thoughts were or what concerned them. So even when they had your signs, Heather, I'd go and knock on that door and talk with them because, you know, like I said, I wasn't necessarily going to say I don't think you should vote for Heather, but I wanted to ask him, like, what issues are important to you? Because I don't know what I don't know, and I find out more by talking to people.
Thank you. We'll start with Thaddeus on this question, and this is from an audience member. If systemic racism does not exist, why have all of our presidents been white men?
Unfortunately, I think systemic racism exists, so I don't think that's a question pertaining to me, so I have to pass on that one.
Joshua.
First, I have to point out a little bit of a falsehood in that question, because we did have a president who was not a white man. We had President Obama for 2 terms. He is a person of black descent. And I would say that I don't know why most of our presidents have been white men, but I would say part of it would probably be the fact that most of our populace is of Caucasian descent, so that might play into it partially. But outside of that, I'm not sure exactly why.
Heather.
The first group of people that could vote were white men. I think it's your leadership path from there.
Thank you. Where did the historic budget surplus go? And this will be for Joshua.
That is an excellent question. I'm still trying to figure that one out myself, because if I'm reading things correctly, a lot of it had to do with a bill that was 1,400 pages long, and I've only just barely scratched the surface of reading it. So I'm not exactly sure yet because I've still got to read and find out where it went.
Heather?
The bill he's referring to is a policy bill. So when you talk about the surplus, we did the surplus 2 years ago, and there's a lot of money that we put into that, including we gave a lot of money to our counties to do things. We built a robust public safety system. We did the child tax credit that many of us in our community have helped. We made college accessible for anybody who makes $80,000 or less to stay in our community, which actually that had a ripple effect that made access to higher education in this region great. We've actually invested a lot into education. We've invested a lot into homelessness, and so I think we know exactly where the surplus went, and I think that there are places that you can go to see that. I think what we did is we built systems that have been so robustly for decades underserved that they were falling apart, that we're starting to build back. We have a lot of work to do. One swipe at it doesn't fix it. We did increase what we're putting out into the communities to allow the communities to do the work that they need to do. And so I think and I believe what we've been able to do is support all areas of the system and made Minnesota just so much better to be and to grow and to live. And we've seen that in other data areas as well.
Thaddeus?
I'm a proud Minnesota resident because of the services that we do provide for those who might need them in their worst case scenario. A lot of our funding did go, in addition to that, was to our child program to make sure our kids do eat well during school, because as a person myself, I'm admitting that I did not have a lunch in school. I focus on the hunger pains instead of my education, and that does matter. I am proud of a lot of the spending that did happen because it did provide services for those that do need it to where we can succeed. Again, like Paul Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better, and that starts with making sure that we do have those services and provide funding when we have it as a surplus to those that need it the most.
Thank you. Heather, we'll start with you. How are tribes being addressed when it comes to Governor Walz wanting to make Minnesota, well, this person seems worried about illegal immigrants finding a place here?
So first of all, I think that's a lack of education because Native American people have never been illegal immigrants on this land. I don't know what the question is. I'm not going to address that.
Sure.
So I sit on the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, and we've actually had these conversations. Every agency, every bill, every space, we meet with them. It's one of the things that the state does. We have tribal state consultations. We're the first state and only state to do that. And so I've sat in those meetings, and I know that we've had robust conversations with the tribes about it. It's legislation, and that's something that, again, keeping in mind that the governor signs our legislation, it's the legislators that actually do the work. The agencies and the legislators have actually had those conversations with the tribes. I've been part of them.
Thaddeus?
As a candidate only, I am more willing to come to the table and have those conversations and try to be a person for both sides, as well as, try to find some good reason in the situation. I know it's a very tough subject. I do know that we do have a demand for the illegal immigrants, as what people call them, that do come and they do work our crops. They do help our farmers. They do make our ag industry successful in Minnesota. And we do have to ensure that they do have some assistance when they do come here for that work, because we do rely on them as a community as well as an economy in the state of Minnesota.
Thank you. Joshua?
So when it comes to people who have crossed our southern border or any other border without going through the due process of applying for immigration status or applying to become a U.S. citizen, that would make them a criminal, in which case they should be detained and they should most likely be deported. Now, if you want to go and do those legal processes, sign up for asylum, sign up to be a legal immigrant, and possibly even look towards the path of citizenship, that is a very different matter, in which case we very much welcome you in Minnesota.
Thank you. You guys have done a great job. I think this might be a record. I think we got through 15 questions. Congratulations. We are going to end our question answer portion of the evening. There is one more question just for the league here. Someone wants to know, where is the other candidate for 4B? And we did invite everyone, and some people chose not to attend. So that's the answer to that. Before we move on to closing statements, just want to remind everyone, use vote411.org. It's super helpful, and it's just, you can learn about even just like the soil and water people and judges and that kind of a thing. So we will move on to closing remarks. Thaddeus, let's start with you.
Well, again, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for providing this opportunity for our community to listen to the candidates that were here present and give our opinions on the questions that are valid questions in our communities. One of the things as a candidate, I'm blessed, to be honest with you, because I had the experience to go to a lot of our communities and knock on the doors of both sides of our party and have good conversations. Commonly, we have a need for access to affordable child care, health care, senior care services, as well as EMS and fire hall funding for our local areas. So we need to provide that. We need to make sure that we have a representative that votes yes for those items, and I will do that. Another last thing that I did want to say is that I've had fun on this journey. It was a great time. Going to Detroit Lakes, participating with the water festival, enjoying the time with my daughters. It gets me kind of emotional because you get to hear the hardships of the community and you want to make sure that you do right for them.
Thank you. Joshua?
So I would also like to thank the League as well as the Moorhead Public Library for hosting this, as well as myself on a couple occasions. I did a couple of things based out of here. But I would like to thank all of you in the community for coming out tonight. And I understand that a lot of you might have had questions that you did not get to have answered. If you'd like to ask them, feel free to come and ask me, or you can email me as well. I've got an email that you can send questions to. If you want to get that, just go ahead and ask. So I would say, yeah, there's a lot to learn. And I've learned a lot in campaigning, going out and talking with people in the community, and there's more to learn still. And I hope to get that opportunity to continue to learn.
Thank you. Heather?
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you all for coming and engaging. I want to just sort of end with the story of who I am that I don't often share. Is I'm a jingle dress dancer in the powwow circuit, and what that is it's the healing dress. And so the one thing I take a lot of pride in is as I go out and have these conversations, I really hear you to the point that I'm actually working on a jingle dress to take all your prayers and to put it into motion. And so it's so much more than just being your state representative. This is a way of life for me. I'm not a representative that just goes in January and stays in the city the entire time. I actually make the trips to come back because it's critical to have those Friday afternoon meetings with our community on major decisions that are being made to go back and vote on. And so I do the work. I show up. I go back and forth. I come back. You'll see me at the games. You'll see me at the grocery store. You'll see me in this community during session because I am deeply rooted and committed to this. And so I thank you all for joining me. I thank you all for the conversations we've had to educate me in this work. And I would agree. I want to pause and say thanks to your kids. You brought your kids. Mine are elsewhere. But it is critical as parents that we step up to do what is right for the next generation. And I want to say thank you to your kids for allowing you to join us on this campaign trail as well. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, folks. Thank you all for showing up and being active participants here tonight. Thank you to the candidates for participating in democracy this way. We can't have a democracy without folks like you. Thank you to the volunteers. Thank you to MCAM. Thank you to the Moorhead Public Library. Have a good night. Be well.